All right, hi students. This is going to be pretty quick as we continue to talk about kind of the Gilded Age that we started to talk about the other day, and how vertical and horizontal integration really influenced the rise of corporations and monopolies. So a couple of things I want to talk about before we get into that. As the prices of many goods decreased, workers' real wages increased, providing new access to a variety of goods and services. There's going to be a word that we talk about later on called conspicuous consumption, and it was kind of like this idea of keeping up with the Joneses. Many Americans' standard of living improved, but I want you to understand that this was the middle class. Their standard of living improved, while the gap between the rich and the poor grew. So there's this very wide gap between the super rich and the very poor, and it keeps getting further and further. But those in the middle class tended to enjoy a better standard of living. However, we also have great spikes in immigration, so we see the poor class getting larger, but also not really making it to the middle class. And so this idea of the Gilded Age, if you have this sheet, this was Mark Twain's idea, and I think maybe you've already talked about it a little bit, at least in English, that on the surface it looked great. You know, that this idea of there's a lot of goods and services and democracy is continuing to happen, but underneath it's really not as good as it seems, and that's where we see the poor class. Boss Tweed is a huge Democratic political leader, political boss in New York City at this time. That's a cartoon there of Boss Tweed, and he's kind of like the ideal of the original Fat Cat. And if you know what I mean by that, like, he was very corrupt. He did things to swindle the government. He was part of the government. He was a part of the New York City political machine, which basically said he would go to poorer areas and basically say, hey, you vote for me and I'm gonna like find you a place to live, or I'm gonna find you a job. And maybe he could find them a job, but then it really turned out to be a very poor conditions, bad working conditions, low wages, these things. And a lot of people who lived in the poor class at this time lived in tenement housing. And what we see in tenement housing is we're starting to build up. And this is a part of the Industrial Revolution, because now we have the machinery, we have the ability to build upward. And now we see these big apartment complexes coming into existence. This is probably one of the most famous photos right here. In fact, it showed up on the AP exam 4 or 5 years ago, I want to say, maybe 2016. It showed up on the AP exam as one of the SAQs. And it was from a guy named Jacob Riis, R-I-I-S. I can move this up a little bit. Jacob Riis wrote this kind of very stark look, this expose, if you will, called How the Other Half Lives. And he really wanted to show like how the other half lives. You know, a lot of this, the middle class America didn't realize how bad it was. And he showed what a tenement housing would have looked like. How many men? 1, 2, 3, 4, probably like 5 guys are living in squalor. They would have shared a bathroom on one floor, so it's almost like dormitory living. Terrible conditions, no sanitation, no really heat or probably electricity, or very little of it. And this is in areas like New York City that are becoming hugely populated and really quite metropolitan and cosmopolitan, yet we see, you know, within blocks, we see the ritzy areas of New York City, and then just blocks away, tenement housing. And so there's a lot of people starting to speak out socially about this, including a famous book by Helen Hunt Jackson called The Century of Dishonor. You could probably put Century of Dishonor under the Gilded Age here. Basically, she wrote this book about, what did I put? The injustices faced by Native Americans. So she really exposed what had been happening to Native Americans, and they were just pushed to the side. She especially focused on the Trail of Tears. It was kind of like much of America didn't realize that that had gone on. And she exposed it, and she told the story in 1881. Now think about what's happening in 1881. We've got the Sioux Wars. We've got all of the treaties being made in the middle part of America and in the western part of the United States. And really, like Wounded Knee and the Battle of Little Bighorn and things like this. Pine Ridge, like these are all happening, and she's trying to expose what the truth of Native American treatment has been like. All right, so last slide then, one more. Many business leaders sought increased profits by consolidating corporations into large trusts and holding companies, which further concentrated wealth. And so when we talk about a near monopoly is kind of this idea of predatory pricing. And if you know what predatory pricing means, it means that you're going to undercut your competitors. There's the word, your competitors. You're going to undercut your competitors until they can't stay in business. So when we talk about predatory pricing, Amazon, I'm sorry, I love Amazon, but unfortunately they're really predators because they undercut others' pricing, and then as soon as those businesses go out, then they jack up the prices. So let's just take something basic like clothes. So let's say there was a mom and pop place that, is in the clothing line. Well, they can't keep up with mass production. They can't keep up with the prices. Their wages, they have to continue to pay more and more for wages. And other businesses come along that are larger businesses, and they sell those same clothes for a lower price. Once that smaller business, that mom and pop business goes out of business, then that predatory pricing, that monopoly, then kind of swallows up all of those consumers, takes over those consumers, and then raises the price on those goods. And so then the consumers are right back to, for a while it was great, there was some competition, but then the prices go back up. So this is what's called predatory pricing or monopolies. In fact, I think you should probably put, I guess you would probably put monopolies under the Gilded Age on your sheet here, because that was a real factor of that. The Standard Oil Trust, this is Rockefeller. He controlled 95% of the U.S. oil supply through the Standard Oil Company. That's a lot. He held a near monopoly. And in talking about that, sometimes they became holding companies. And holding companies were basically created to buy other companies and control their stocks. So if you are maybe the Standard Oil Trust, you're actually going to buy another company and then keep majority control of that company. But it's all kind of funneled into the Standard Oil Trust Company. So the more money you have, the more kind of power and business you can make. And it became a little bit unfair. A lot of these big entrepreneurs and big powerful financial business capitalists that I spoke of would start business pools. And what a business pool is they kind of 4 or 5 companies or people would agree to kind of shut out the little guy, and they would keep their prices similar in order to stop any other competition. And it became kind of a bully system, really, if you want to think of it that way. So once again, as we've talked, this idea of are they really impressive, very savvy business people? Or is this more like a robber baron? Are they the captains of industry that are guiding this kind of movement? Or are they more the robber barons who are really, really sticking it to the consumer and the worker for that matter, and really only, being self-sufficient for themselves or supplying for themselves? And that's a real question. You know, capitalism sometimes has a very ugly face to it. Within the monopoly system, something called horizontal and vertical integration. If you look at these two graphics, vertical integration is when from the start to the finish, you own all levels of production. So if you look at that, you own the cattle, you own the farm, you own the slaughterhouse, you own the railroad cars for refrigerating, the cooled warehouse, the meat packing plants, the delivery wagons, all of that you own. With horizontal integration, you can purchase these competing companies in the same industry, and then you kind of absorb them all into your company. That's what we really consider a monopoly. However, in vertical integration is almost a monopoly as well. It's just that you're investing a lot of money into many different types of holding companies almost, where you have that purchasing power. So both of these horizontal and vertical integration are really truly what has led to the modern day corporation. This is where we see another good example of Amazon. You know, Amazon got into probably about 10 or 15 years ago into the food service industry. And now Amazon, it's becoming huge. Amazon is getting into the delivery system, you know, where they would actually deliver the packages. And in fact, they have even contracted out with the United States Postal Service. So if you get an Amazon package on a Sunday from the United States Postal Service, it's actually being paid by Amazon. So this is a really good example of how modern day corporations have kind of taken a page from the vertical and horizontal integration model. So that's it for today. I hope you have some things filled out on the income gap, on Gilded Age, and actually that's it. So until we meet again, goodbye.